have always been intrigued by the terrifying otherworldly creatures and entities, and I think we can all agree that the 80s were some of the best years for this genre in cinema. From the xenomorph to the predator and many other creatures across hundreds of films, the genre redefined sci-fi horror. But in this video, I'll bring you one of the more obscure creatures of this era, the infamous Radu Molasar, from an underrated horror classic titled The Keep. The movie, directed by Michael Mann, offers an interesting World War II storyline featuring an entity that looks as remarkable as the lore surrounding it. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. How is Radu Molasar introduced in the story? The Keep, as we have already mentioned, is premised during the events of World War II, and the year is 1941 as things get rolling. It is the commencement of Operation Barbarossa, which is basically the invasion of the Soviet Union by Nazi Germany. A German motorized unit, under the command of Captain Klaus Warmann, arrives at an abandoned citadel, which is known as the Keep, and the motive of the mission is to take control of the Dinu Pass in the Carpathian Mountains. Lutz and Anton, two soldiers of the unit, try to loot a metallic icon within the keep, and they unknowingly release a sinister spectral entity which kills them. This is the mighty Radu Molasar, and the soldiers in the unit soon find out that they have bigger threats to deal with than the defending Soviet troops. It kills 5 more soldiers in the next few days, and starts to take corporeal form. What does the movie reveal about the origin and backstory of Radu Molasar? Slowly, the narrative lets us in on more secrets about this mysterious entity. But first, a detachment of the notorious SS Einsatzkommandos, a deadly killing squad, arrives under the command of a sadistic general, Erich Kampfer. He is here to deal with suspected Soviet partisan activity in the neighboring village. But even as his oppressions continue, the local village priest, Father Fonescu, urges them to retrieve an ailing Jewish historian named Theodor Kuza from a concentration camp. He deciphers a mysterious message written in Old Slavonic on a wall of the citadel and learns more about the entity. Meanwhile, Radu Molasar turns out to be a great savior for Kuza by saving his daughter Eva from being sexually assaulted by 2 of the kill squad soldiers. The entity also cures Kuza of his debilitating scleroderma, and now the historian is indebted to the favors of the entity. Radu Molasar demands only one thing from Kuza. He must remove a talisman from the keep, which will then allow the entity to escape from its long confinement and emerge into the outside world. As for his backstory, the details are not handed out in the narrative, but the movie does drop some subtle hints about the origin. It can be assumed that the Radu Molasar was a malevolent entity back in the day, and Glaken Trismegistus, the stranger who arrives later in the movie, had imprisoned him within the keep centuries ago. Glaken had used a talisman, which prevented the entity from escaping the keep, and it could also be used as a weapon against him. However, when the 2 German soldiers displaced the talisman, Radu Molasar was free, even though he still couldn't leave the keep without the talisman removed permanently. What is the appearance and form of Radu Molasar? How does the entity sustain itself? Radu Molasar has a golem-like appearance, and he stands taller than a grown human. After spending years in captivity, he had been weakened, but gradually, with more and more victims to his name, he regains his strength and his physical form. This is when we see Radu Molasar regenerating into a hulking humanoid beast. The first version of Radu Molasar that we see in the movie appears in a shroud of mist, and it takes a few more kills for his true form to be unleashed. The feeding habits of Radu Molasar are somewhat similar to that of a vampire. He feeds on the life force of his victims and sucks out this life force through their eyes and mouths. What is left behind is only their physical body, which is no more than an empty husk that sometimes shatters and implodes. Is the entity a vampire or a demonic creature? The nature of the entity in the keep is never spelled out for the audience, which means that our imaginations are free to run wild. However, most of my theories on this creature suggest that it cannot be categorized easily as a demonic being or a vampire. The best way to describe Radu Molasar is that it is a fusion of both and something in between these two. The entity shares certain vampiric traits. It has existed since ancient times, and this supernatural entity preys on humans, much like some versions of vampires, where they are shown to drain the life force of individuals. Also, the name Radu has some significance, as historically, Radu is the brother of Vlad the Impaler, or Dracula, and the name of the entity further confirms his vampire origins. Just like vampires can be held off by certain talismans and holy objects, Radu Molasar also reveals its weakness against the talisman that keeps him captive within the keep. It can also be deduced that Radu Molasar is a creature from hell, a demonic entity that has been trapped within the keep until it finds its way out and wreaks havoc. This theory is also supported by the fact that the entity desperately wants to get out of the keep into the outside world, possibly to spread its corrupting influence among the people. It is interesting to know that in the 1981 novel by F. Paul Wilson, Radu Molasar is actually an alias, and his true name is Rassilom, an ancient malevolent being that pretends to be a Romanian vampire to manipulate others. The movie never explores the Rassilom identity, and it is probably an attempt to make the entity more mysterious in nature. What are some of the supernatural powers of Radu Molasar? The evil entity is capable of some great supernatural powers, and one of the first things that we notice about the entity is his ability to influence its surroundings, spreading fear and darkness. It kills swiftly and violently, and human soldiers don't have a chance against him even in its weakened state. It takes someone of superhuman strength and powers to challenge the entity. Some of the viewers have dubbed Molasar to be a shapeshifter because of how it changes its form, but I think it's more of the evolving nature of the entity that takes its complete physical form as it becomes more powerful with more victims falling before it. The entity has shown strong mind-controlling abilities, and merely the presence of Molasar can drive someone crazy. The villagers and the soldiers are impacted by its ability to drive people insane. Radu Molasar can also cure people of severe ailments, which we see with Kuza. It is also capable of returning the affliction and infecting people, and almost acts as a malicious demonic presence. Can we consider Radu Molasar to be an intelligent entity? Often, such movies present before us entities that are purely malicious and animalistic without any intelligence or strategic thought. Radu Molasar, however, does not fit into the stereotype because this sinister entity clearly has plans of its own. It knows the extent of its strength, which is why it starts off by targeting soldiers in groups of 1 or 2. Finally, when it is powerful enough, it takes down greater numbers effortlessly. Also, Radu Molasar is not all about killing to satiate some bloodlust that it cannot control. This entity seeks freedom into the outside world, and for that, it is clever enough to trick the Jewish historian Theodor Kuza. It makes him believe that Radu Molasar is a benevolent entity and even promises to rid Romania of the Nazis if Kuza does his bidding. Curing him of his ailment is also a smart move from Radu Molasar, but unfortunately, it doesn't work out too well, and Kuza's daughter Eva is finally able to convince him to not remove the talisman that will free the entity. How is Radu Molasar defeated in the movie? Can he be killed? The mysterious entity keeps getting more powerful with time, and after sensing its presence, a stranger named Glaucon Trismegistus arrives from Greece. He seduces Eva, and Kuza is not too pleased about his presence. Also, the German soldiers treat him with hostility, and to make matters worse, the malign power of Molasar starts to affect the villagers as well. Many of them are driven crazy, and the entity soon takes the attack to the German forces, taking out the entire garrison of the citadel, including the sadistic SS officer who gets a much-deserved death. Meanwhile, Kuza attempts to remove the talisman as promised, but he is stopped by Eva, and seeing this, Radu Molasar orders him to kill his own daughter. When he refuses, Molasar returns him to his diseased state. Now, Glaucon arrives and recovers the talisman, and the entity is confronted in a dramatic climactic battle. Glaucon is able to weaken Molasar significantly, and he banishes the entity into the inner sanctum of the keep once again. The aperture that freed Molasar earlier is sealed off again, and the evil is contained for now, as Kuza and Eva are led away from the place by the villagers. We don't get a clear picture of whether or not the monstrous entity can be killed. Radu Molasar has existed for centuries, and if this is one of the evil creatures from the beginning of time, then there might be a chance that the entity is immortal. The talisman used by Glaucon can only weaken the entity enough to trap it within the keep, but even this strange superpowered individual cannot kill Molasar. It can be assumed that once Radu Molasar is trapped away, it remains in a dormant state until it is awakened again, like during the events of the movie. Who is Glaucon, and why is he able to defeat the entity? Glaucon Trismegistus, the mysterious stranger, is portrayed as an immortal champion of the forces of light, and he is the opposite of the evil presence of Radu Molasar. He is the good that balances out the bad and keeps it in check, and when he senses that Molasar is released, he steps in to control the rise of this ancient evil force. This explains how he is able to defeat the supernatural entity, but the means adapted by him are different in the novel and the movie. The novel version shows him wielding a special sword that is powered by the talisman, and he defeats the entity after a fierce battle, reducing Mulasar to ashes. However, this act ends Glaken's immortality and makes him mortal again. Meanwhile, the movie version explores how he uses the mystical talisman to keep Mulasar confined within the keep, and he is then transformed by a storm of light, which seals the aperture that seals the entity away for good. It seems likely that Glaken was the one who imprisoned the powerful entity in the keep, and he just repeats the same when it threatens to be free. What does the monstrous entity truly represent? On the face of it, Radu Mulasar is a malevolent entity that goes on a killing spree and takes down several German soldiers and anybody who stands in its way to freedom. However, if you keep the story aside and consider the metaphorical take on the narrative, you will realize that Radu Mulasar signifies something far more sinister than the Nazi soldiers. It is a representation of the opposition to the unspeakable horrors brought about by the Nazi regime, and you can view this entity as some form of karmic fate for the German soldiers who dare to infringe on foreign lands. It is the greed of 2 German soldiers that freed the entity, and finally, it kills one of the most sadistic German soldiers, marking a fitting end to the cycle. As the more sensible German general remarks, the Nazis had it coming for all the horrible war crimes and acts against humanity, and the Radu Mulasar is justice that comes in the form of a monster, befitting the ones perpetrated by Nazi Germany. It is also a solid metaphor for ancient evil fighting modern-day evil, as the timeless entity takes on the Nazi soldiers in a fight for supremacy. Marvelous verdict, a decent novel adaptation, and a perfect monster. That is just about all we can say to sum up our experience of watching The Keep and the antics of Radu Mulasar. The movie boasts of some extraordinary visuals and powerful sequences, and what affects the narrative is probably the lack of experience of the director, which leads to muddled scripting and unclear action sequences. It is still a decent adaptation of the original novel, and the idea of putting together a strange supernatural force in a Romanian citadel preying upon German soldiers is also quite unique. Overall, Radu Mulasar might not be the most genre-defining monster out there, and the practical effects might not impress the modern-day crowd, but it still holds a special place in the hearts of those who grew up through the 80s and such entertaining movies. Do let us know in the comments below what you think of the monstrous entity in The Keep, and also tell us about other similar entities that come to mind from the long line of 80s creature features. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, be safe, and thanks everyone.